Hi artists, in this video we're going to look at covering your sculpture of an animal with paper mache. The first thing I wanted to show you was from the last video you should have been able to make your sculpture out of some recycled materials. One thing I didn't mention in that video, or didn't show you in that video, but you should definitely consider is attaching your animal to a piece of cardboard. Especially if your animal has only two legs that it's going to stand on, like this bird here, you definitely want to put it on a base just to give it something stronger to stand on. Even this rhino that I'm making, I'm going to have it standing on something. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take a few pieces of tape that are vertical going from the rhino to the piece of cardboard that it's standing on, and I'm going to do that in two places. And once I've done that in two places, some vertical pieces, I'm going to do a piece that's horizontal to help keep that secure, and I'm going to do that as close to the foot of my rhino as I can. That's going to help secure it while I'm putting my paper mache on, keep it from moving. I'm also going to take a horizontal piece and wrap it around the leg to keep things secure as well. And once I have that, I'm good to go to start paper macheing. So the other things you're going to need is some type of paper to cover stuff by. I'm using pieces of newspaper, but you can use notebook paper, you could use paper towels, you could use copy paper, just about any paper that you have. The other thing I'm going to use is I'm going to use our homemade glue, our mixture of flour, water, and salt. So check out the video on making that. It's pretty easy, and it can be with stuff that you have around your home. But the biggest you're going to want your papers to be is about the size of the palm of your hand, but you might make them smaller depending on where it's going to be. So a few suggestions to you. One, I think it is helpful to start from the bottom of your sculpture and work your way up, meaning that I would cover like those same connections that I was making with tape. So having that leg and having pieces that touch the ground and the leg, I would do that same thing with newspaper. And when I'm doing my newspaper, I'm dipping it in, but then I'm wiping off the extra. I want it wet. I don't want it drippy. So in a few places, I'm going to take some newspaper that goes up and down, and that's going to help to secure our sculpture to that cardboard base. So one of the things that paper mache does for your sculpture is it gives it a hard outer shell, but the other thing that paper mache does for your sculpture is it glues these separate pieces together. So my sculpture is made of newspaper, it's made of bottle caps, it's made of cardboard, it's made of tape. And the goal of the paper mache then is to fuse all of those things together so that they become one, so that they're not separate things anymore. So in the end, if I've done this right, all I should see is newspaper. Alright, one thing I'm going to do around these legs is I'm going to take some longer pieces now and I'm going to wrap it. So I'm going to take a piece that's longer, more like hand length, and I'm going to go around it. So I know that I said before to not use pieces that are bigger than the palm of your hand, but one of the things that I've realized with stuff is that you always need to know that there can be exceptions to rules, and knowing when those exceptions play is important. So like with sculpture, with paper mache sculpture, knowing that when you're wrapping something like that leg, it might be a good time to try some longer pieces, because wrapping those can be a little neater and a little more secure. But then up here I'm going to go back to my bigger pieces. Another place where I like using longer pieces is if I have something like this, like the belly of my rhino, something that's going to be drooping under. Because if I try to put small pieces under there, one thing that can happen is when I stand this upright, those pieces under there might try to fall off. So what I'm going to do is take a longer piece and go under it and then wrap it up around the sides. And that's one of those things where having several times of making one of these sculptures and having those pieces on the bottom try to fall off on me, I've figured out that that's a place where those longer pieces might be useful. I'm going to do the same thing going from front to back as well. I'm going to put a piece under there going from front to back, and then trying to use my fingers and smooth them out. And then looking for any places that were missed by those big pieces and covering them by smaller pieces. But our goal with this is to get our entire sculpture covered so that all we see is that newspaper. One thing that I don't necessarily have to cover, I have a tiny cardboard tail back here, and I don't have to necessarily cover it unless I want it to be a little bit more round. But one thing I would want to definitely make sure of is I want to definitely make sure I cover up the tape of it. Otherwise that tail's gonna fall off for sure. So alright, let's talk a little bit about some details, because one of the things you may run into with this is you may, after you made things, you may be thinking to yourself that some of the features that you have don't seem proportionally right. Like when I'm looking at a photo of a rhino and I'm looking at my sculpture, I start noticing things. I start noticing that that toilet paper roll was a good thing to use for the neck, but it's not thick enough. Rhinos have a thicker neck than that, and it kind of throws off the look of my sculpture when that detail just kind of jumps out at me. Makes my rhino look a little too skinny. So let's look at ways that we can add details, and let me also show you some ways that you can build up places that need to be built up some. So let me try to cover a few spots on this so we can look at adding details. And in these corners that are in these areas that are so round, I find sometimes you have to use smaller pieces, and if something's sticking up, usually it just means that you need another piece to weigh it down. Alright, let's look at adding details. So one way that I could fix that neck where it's not thick enough is I can add more than one piece at a time. So I could take multiple pieces to make that thicker, and try to add that thickness all at once. The one caution I will throw at you with that is then that area is going to dry a lot slower than the rest of this. So like I'm adding all of these papers. I added probably 6 papers that I stacked up all at once to this to try to thicken up that neck. And one other thing I'm trying to do with that is try to sort of drape it on there loosely. And then I'm going to put a piece kind of diagonally on that to fuse it in place. One other thing that you can do is you don't always have to put things down smoothly. So like a rhino has droops from loose skin, so I can make a piece where it has some droops in it where I left a kind of a flap sticking up, and that can sort of help to start to make it look like it has actual skin, because we're seeing some of those imperfections in it. So imperfections or seemingly imperfections in your work can actually add to the realism of it, because we see that it actually has the look of skin. So we can add layers all at once. Another thing that I'll do sometimes is I'll stack up pieces, or I'll make like a little mound. So like here, where I would really want a shoulder, I'm gonna stack up a few pieces and dip those all at once to kind of make a little mound, and I'm going to try to build up that area to start to make what looks like a shoulder, give that area a little more definition. So multiple layers at once can start to do that for us. One other thing you can also do for eyes, like I need an eye up here, I could do an eyelid, so I could fold a piece in half. And what I'm going to do where I want my eye, which is going to be about here in the middle, one thing I'm going to do first is I'm going to ball up a piece of newspaper that's going to kind of serve the role of my eye. And I'm going to put that where I want my eye to be. So I want my eye to be about there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a piece of folded newspaper under, and I may put a folded piece of newspaper over it too. And what that can help me to do is to start to get the look of an actual realistic eye. And it's one of those things where you kind of have to play around with it until you get it to look the way you really want. And then where I have this extra there, where that eyelid piece was too long, I'm going to then cover up the extra with some pieces as I build up the area around it. So, and I could do something on a smaller scale up in the front to do nostrils. But I hope that has helped you some. I hope that's given you some ideas of ways that you can begin to do your sculpture and make your sculpture of your animal. And when you're done, I would love to see it. You can send me a Google form, you can email me. But I hope that it turns out well. You can give it color when you're done. You could use paint if you have paint at home. If you don't have paint at home, that's okay. You can also even add paint to this because it's paper. You could color it with marker. You could color it with colored pencils. You could color it with by even collaging. So there are so many ways that you can finish it. You can also just leave it in the beautiful form of paper. So, but I hope that has helped, and have a wonderful day. Happy making!